United States naval leaders are baffled as to how to keep up with China's constantly growing fleet of warships due to this developing issue. The head of the US Navy recently warned that American shipyards simply can't keep up with China, which some experts estimate can build 3 warships in the time it takes the US to build one. This is just one of the worries alongside Beijing's increasing aggression in the South China Sea and around Taiwan that is likely to be on US Defense Secretary Lloyd M. Mnuchin's mind. The likelihood of a resolution to any of those issues this weekend seems slim, not least because China explicitly rejected a US proposal for Austin to meet his Chinese counterpart, Shang Fu, at the forum. However, experts who spoke to CNN before the summit say a potential resolution to one of them, the Chinese fleet's numerical advantage, is within reach if the US is willing to think outside the box. Washington, they claim, has something Beijing doesn't: galleys in South Korea and the ability to send ships, according to Blake Herzinger, a research fellow of the United States Study Center in Australia. Japan has some of the top warship designers in the world. Since both nations and the United States have mutual defense treaties, Carl Schuster, a former director of operations at the Joint Intelligence Center of the U.S. Pacific Command, asks why the United States doesn't collaborate with them to outbuild China. The issue is that American law now prohibits the Navy from purchasing foreign-built ships, even from allies, or from building its ships abroad due to security concerns, as well as a desire to safeguard the shipbuilding sector in America. A rising number of experts, including Schuster Herzinger, believe it may be time to reevaluate that law to offer the United States an advantage in the competition for the seas and to pose a challenge to China's Type 055s. The Pentagon believes that China's Navy currently has roughly 340 warships, compared to the United States' less than 300. It predicts that the Chinese fleet will increase to 400 ships in the following 2 years, whereas the US fleet won't reach 350 ships until 2045. However, concerns have been expressed about more than simply the Chinese Navy's growing size. China's Type 055 is widely regarded as the world's premier destroyer, displacing 12,000 to 13,000 tons. It is larger than typical destroyers and is closer in size to the U.S. Navy's Ticonderoga class of cruisers. It has 112 vertical launch system VLS sails that fire surface-to-air anti-ship missiles, which are more powerful than most of the anti-ship missiles used by the U.S. Navy. The U.S. work on its Zumwalt class destroyers has been much slower. Construction started 5 years earlier, but only 2 have entered service. However, some Western analysts claim that Type 055 may have appeared in South Korea's Sejong, the grade-class destroyers, at 10,000 to 12,000 tons. It also boasts sophisticated radio and anti-submarine weapon systems, and China is pumping them out. It began building the Type 055s in 2014 and recently commissioned its 8th design. The pride of the South Korean fleet is the 3 Sejongs, which cost over $925 million each. With just one ship, the South Korean Navy can handle several problems at once: anti-ship, anti-submarine, anti-surface, and ballistic missile defense, according to the nation's defense media agency. Retired South Korean Admiral Duck Ki Kim, who was the first to command a major, claims is more than capable of competing with China's Type 055 missiles. Instead of emphasizing the quality of its ships, China is concentrating on quantity and price competitiveness. According to Kim, the current vice president of the Korea Association of Military Studies, low-cost, high-spec Japan, too, boasts top-notch destroyers. The nation's newest Maya-class destroyers are equipped with 96 VLS cells that can fire both anti-ballistic and anti-submarine missiles, and according to Alessio Padalano, professor of war and strategy at King's College in London, the quality of its sensors and systems is at the very top end of the spectrum. Last November, the Mayas demonstrated their ability to destroy ballistic missiles traveling outside of Earth's atmosphere. Those 96 VLS cells put the Maya's cost of the Arleigh Burke's $2.2 billion Chinese shipbuilding has shown amazing potential for mass manufacturing, and the Mayas represent both quantity and quality because they are high-spec, relatively cheap, and can roll off production lines at speed. It's not just the Mayas who are using Japan's Megami-class frigates, as they are setting the standard for inexpensive quality on a scale greater than other naval powers without compromising commissioning timeframes that balance and the experience and the philosophy are a genuine edge. Patella remarked. The first of the U.S. Navy's under-development Constellation-class frigates are expected to cost 3 times as much and require twice as many crew, which is less than ideal given the U.S. Navy is having a hard time recruiting. The U.S. Vice Chief of Naval Operations has stated it is likely that the U.S. Navy will struggle to find enough crew for the first of its under-development Constellation-class frigates. In Japan, contracts are uncommon. Because of this, Schuster argues, the nation holds manufacturers accountable for their forecasts. A Japanese shipbuilder's bid is final. If they complete it for less money than anticipated, they will profit more. If they have delays and errors, they will have to pay to fix them. The Pentagon has spent billions on platforms that opponents contend are platforms that the American strategy about Taiwan is deterrence. Schuster claims that approach was far wiser than that of the US. He makes this assertion while pointing to the purported problems with Zumwalt-class destroyers and actual combat ships. The possibility of a nuclear exchange makes conflicts something that should be avoided at all costs. Only a big force of supercarriers equipped with squadrons of the most cutting-edge fighter attack aircraft and enough of them to achieve air superiority in the maritime theater will be able to achieve this deterrence. But how effective is this deterrence? Why America consistently loses 2 aircraft carriers throughout this wargame. The Center for Strategic and International Studies played a wargame simulating a Chinese amphibious assault on Taiwan 24 times for different scenarios in January 2023. Most of the time, the United States, Taiwan, and Japan were able to beat the Chinese, but it cost a terrible price in the form of the loss of a great number of ships, aircraft, and service members. It is important to remember that the United States was able to defend Taiwan even in the worst-case scenario. China only won completely if the United States did not get involved. What's fascinating is this. The United States lost 2 supercarriers in every iteration of the worst-case scenario. That occurred when the carrier strike groups ran out of interceptor ammunition after being targeted by numerous sizable salvos of contemporary Chinese anti-ship missiles. The wargame research accepts that the US Navy's advanced deployment of carriers to expose locations near Okinawa to discourage China contributed to some of the carrier losses. The US would normally lose 7 to 20 large vessels such as destroyers and cruisers, in addition to supercarriers. Comparatively, China would lose 138 ships on average, of which 86 were amphibious and 52 were significant surface combatants. An interesting finding of the wargame study was that 90% of all lost aircraft were destroyed on the ground as a result of Chinese missile attacks on Okinawa and Guam, regardless of the relative strength of US and Chinese air-to-air capacity. The US Navy is unsure of what to do. One startling finding was that it would be too risky for US and Japanese ships to reach Taiwan until China used up all of its anti-ship ballistic missiles. It would essentially be a long-range missile conflict. Those with the most missiles will win. The wargame's findings suggest that the US should emphasize submarines and hypersonic weapons over fighter aircraft, switch to smaller, more durable ships, and prioritize bombers with long-range missiles over fighter aircraft. Nothing about Chinese aircraft carriers was mentioned in the wargame. Of course, if a Chinese carrier strike group is east of Taiwan when the attack begins, they run the chance of being hit by a coordinated multi-axis attack, which they might not make it through. This implies that in a fight, one side could wish to fire early to maintain an edge. In reality, the Chinese conducted a war scenario on their own as recently as mid-April 2023, positioning their aircraft carrier Shandong east of Taiwan and staging a mock attack to test how Taiwan would react to threats coming from both the east and the west. The Americans are concerned about the rapid development of China's navy. The growing navy threat from China. Modern anti-ship ballistic missiles like the DF-21 are also concerning. Chinese aircraft carriers are still in their infancy as they get more familiar with all aspects of operating an aircraft carrier, including the flight deck, corrosion control, and firefighting procedures. Personnel may be the most restricting element. Chinese aircraft carriers, therefore, do not yet pose a danger, but they are playing the long game. China won't completely settle down on carrier capabilities until the next generation of carriers. The power differential between China and the United States will be a key factor in shaping the future dynamics of global security as tensions in the South China Sea and the surrounding areas continue to increase. The course of possible confrontations will be shaped by the developing naval capabilities of both nations and their deterrent strategies, although it is yet unclear if deterrence will be effective in preserving peace and stability in the region. Did you like it? Tell us what you think of the video in the comments section below, and don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more interesting videos.